Dr. Kamiński is not going to present this paper, so I will have the pleasure to present the guidelines for the use of non-standard road signs, Polish experiences. We prepared this as part of one of the RID projects when our institute was the leader, together with a bunch of other leaders and sponsors. I would like to, as it were, continue the subject of road signs, maybe not as innovative, but still called experimental or non-standard. These are being introduced in the roads, so they exist. So this is partly the future and the present day, but we do not have yet a procedure that would evaluate us, which will allow us to evaluate the effect of those. I can't swap slides. Thank you. I would first like to start with the definition of non-standard road signs. When we talk about experimental road sign, the way we understand it, that's how we understand it for the purposes of the project. It's any road sign that is not mentioned by the binding regulations, because they have a complete list of signs. If we introduce anything unconventional, obviously, we then have to evaluate it and monitor if its effectiveness. The entire project for experimental markage of roads in the context of the behavior of road users, the project was supposed to answer a number of questions. When is it justified to use those signs? Should we use them? What format should they be in? Where should they be located? And how to measure their effectiveness? In the next presentation, the following presentation, Professor Wątorczyk will tell you more about how to create those signs and how to evaluate them. But I would like to talk more about the procedure, because the procedure was one of the results of the project. Before I go to discuss the procedure, I would like to present a certain background that we used when we created the guidelines. The literature review, which we did at the beginning, and then we used those sources during our research. So based on this reading, we found out that experimental road signs usually pertain to road safety, environmental protection, when we want to affect road traffic, when we want to provide additional services to people traveling on the road. Some of those signs have a more important impact statistically. It is often observed, and we had a presentation about that, that the optical slowdown signs often have important effect on the road surface. We also use vertical signs that are often experimental. So we drew some important conclusions. Not everything can be measured with hard measurements, like the number of accidents, of crashes. Sometimes we have to take a different approach and use simulations to evaluate them. We have to therefore use surrogate measurements. It turns out that if we put the signage in the same place, it does not always have to have the same effect. It can be variable. The effect is variable over time, and the change over time is sometimes very significant. For instance, the new signs have more impact in the beginning, and gradually that impact diminishes. These are some of the examples of those road signs. You will, in the future, see a detailed discussion of the specific signs and their evaluation. So I just wanted to demonstrate the groups of signs. Road management, information for the road users, for drivers, information about toll roads, new information about marking intersections and junctions. The methodology that we used was based on the analysis of understandability or legibility based on surveys. Then we had tests in real traffic. So we run before and after. So a test with the control facility and without the control facility. We took different measurements to evaluate the effectiveness of the signs, and we run simulation studies. Those also included surveys, but also tests that allowed us to see how well the signs were understood and where the attention was focused of the drivers. 2 minutes left. Oh, that was quick. Now, the purpose was to improve road safety. It can be improvement of road safety for a certain selected group of users. It can be the improvement of environmental conditions. The possible assessments can be either absolute numbers. It can be indirect, like, for instance, the change of speed. There can be other purposes of application of experimental signs, such as the change of behaviors of the road users, especially in the context of the changing conditions. For instance, depending on the changing or on the non-desirable weather conditions, like fog, for instance. The before and after tests always allow us to test for instance, the number of crashes. There are other areas where it's actually impossible to use absolute numbers because the signage that announces a toll road or the toll point was not giving any change in the behavior. So we have to do indirect surveys. Simulation must be run wherever actual tests might result in increased hazards. Also, it can prove to be less expensive. For instance, there can be 3 different ways of marking curves on the road. And then you can see what were the effects in terms of the average velocity of vehicles. Mostly, these signs help to improve the perception of the road surface. They can be warning signs in areas of increased risk. They can inform about roadworks, etc. In terms of the procedure itself, it's built of several blocks of generality, 6 of them actually. The first step is the identification of the problem that requires intervention and assessment of the applicability. If we do not have a conventional sign that would solve the problem, then we move to part 2, which is the concept for a non-standard sign. That is when we present the concept and the preliminary expert opinion is obtained. If the preliminary expert opinion, based on literature and other experiences, shows that this signage could have a positive impact, then we go on. If not, we give up on that solution and look for something else. Further, there is understandability tests. These are survey-based. These studies allow us to see to screen off those road signs which are just not understood by the drivers. If the understandability is high, then we can move on to stage 4, which is pilot application. The first one obviously is short-term, checking if the effects, the desired effects were achieved. If yes, we move further. If not, we either correct it or reject it. Now, if the given sign is accepted in stage 4, we move on to stage 5, which is long-term test. We need to see if the positive effects of the sign are maintained over a longer period. If they disappear over the long period, we have to rethink it. If the long-term effect is maintained, then we can move on to recommendation for the widespread usage of this particular sign. Moving on to conclusions. What is important is that the procedure described here limits the use of non-standard signs only to the required signs. They are used only where necessary, thanks to the procedure. So the procedure requires you to make an effort, but it also ensures that you're not going to use non-standard signs where standard signs can be used or where signs are not needed. The procedure also uniforms the rules for the application. Also, some of the signs require information campaigns. Because there are some signs which initially show low understandability results, and yet long-term they actually work, even by improving the situation. For instance, speed limit to a certain selected lane. Now, the driving simulator is one of the possible ways of testing those signs. This is a very important element which allows us to run large-scale tests, especially for those signs that we are really unsure of and we wouldn't want to test them on site in real traffic. This is a fairly expensive device to use, a drive simulator, but it's still cheaper than risking using the wrong signage on site.